Nerissa was only supposed to trim a flower crown, not accidentally propose to the Alpha King before breakfast. The crown sat on her work table like a pale, smug trap. By the time it began glowing, Nerissa had already blamed the fertilizer, the moon, and her own terrible mouth. The royal herbarium was usually the quietest place in Moonspire Palace. Glass ceilings caught dawn light. Warm pipes carried steam beneath stone paths. Rows of moon-dew lilies shivered in blue ceramic troughs. Vines climbed ironwood frames and released the clean scent of rain, mint, and crushed green stems. It was Nerissa's favorite room in the palace. It was also where dignity came to die if one was a low-ranked Omega with sharp scissors and no talent for silence. She stood at the central work table with sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her plain sage dress had 3 patches, 1 burn mark from a heating lamp, and enough pollen on the hem to embarrass a bee. Her dark honey-brown hair was tied in a loose braid. A few curls had escaped around her face because they had more political freedom than she did. On the table lay the Moonwake crown. It was not a real crown. It was worse. It was a ceremonial flower crown for the midsummer banquet, woven from moondew lilies, star thyme, and white velvet leaves. No silver wire held it together, of course. Werewolves could not touch silver without pain. Every royal florist knew that. The frame was pale moonstone and soft gold thread, both expensive enough to make Nerissa's fingers feel underpaid. The crown had been ordered for the future queen. No one knew who that future queen would be. The court had spent all spring pretending not to panic about it. King Aurelian Voss had ruled Moonspire for 7 years. He was 32, cold, controlled, beautiful in the inconvenient way that made portraits look shy, and still unmarried. His council wanted a highborn bride. His generals wanted a political alliance. His elderly aunt wanted great nephews. His wolf soul, according to rumor, wanted everyone to leave him alone. Nerissa wanted the flower crown to stop leaning left. That was her entire ambition. At least, it had been until Lady Caldress entered the herbarium with 4 noble attendants and a smile sharp enough to prune roses. Lady Caldress was not the future queen either, though she behaved as if the palace had misplaced the announcement. She wore a pearl gray gown with moonstone beads at the collar. Sensible. Moonstone was safe, no silver. Everyone in Moonspire knew the old law, but nobles enjoyed being congratulated for not poisoning the king by accident. Behind her came 2 maids from the upper household and a cousin in blue silk. Hessa, the senior flower attendant, followed last. She had never forgiven Nerissa for being better with sick plants. Nerissa kept trimming. If she looked busy enough, sometimes nobles remembered that servants had spines. Not today. How charming, Lady Caldress observed. They let the greenhouse Omega touch the future queen's flowers. Hessa laughed too quickly. Nerissa cut a dead leaf from the crown. The flowers prefer clean hands. That was a mistake. Lady Caldress drifted closer. Her perfume smelled of amber, sharp citrus, and money applied in layers. Careful, little Omega. That crown may rest on a woman who stands beside the Alpha King. The words little Omega slid over Nerissa's skin like cold soap. She had heard worse. Omegas in palace service learned to pack insults into small boxes and stack them behind the ribs. Still, some mornings, the boxes wobbled. Hessa lifted the flower crown and placed it lightly on Nerissa's head. The attendants laughed. The crown was cool against Nerissa's hair. Look, Hessa cooed. For one breath, she can pretend. Nerissa held the pruning scissors very still. Lady Caldress tilted her head. Do not stand near the king tonight, dear. His wolf soul might mistake you for a garnish. More laughter. Nerissa felt heat climb her neck. She could have lowered her eyes. She could have apologized. She could have survived the moment and gone back to saving root rot from people who watered by rank. Instead, her mouth chose treason. Fine, she said, touching the crooked flower crown. Then I will practice. After all, the Alpha King is my future husband. Silence dropped so hard that even the vines seemed to listen. Nerissa heard the sentence after she said it. She disliked it immediately. It was absurd. It was defensive. It was a joke thrown like a clay cup at a marble wall. Then the moondew lilies opened. All of them. Every pale blue bud in the herbarium unfolded at once, though dawn had barely touched the glass. White light ran through the stems. The flower crown on Nerissa's head warmed. A circle of soft moonlit script appeared around her left wrist, bright as frost and harmless as breath. No silver, only light. That made it worse. Someone screamed. Hessa dropped a watering can. Lady Caldris went white. Nerissa stared at her wrist. The glowing mark shaped itself into a crescent, 3 tiny stars, and 1 delicate line that looked horrifyingly like a binding loop. "No," she whispered. "Absolutely not." At the far end of the herbarium, the king's wolf soul crashed through a curtain of hanging moon vines. It was not the king himself. It was worse again. Every alpha monarch carried a visible wolf soul during moon seasons. Most kept theirs dignified. King Aurelian's wolf soul was known for discipline. It appeared at court as a great black wolf made from shadow, moonlight, and royal menace. It sat beside the throne like judgment with teeth. Today it skidded across wet tiles, knocked over a tray of seed pots, and stopped in front of Nerissa with both ears forward. Its pale gold eyes widened. Then it looked over its shoulder toward the palace corridor and howled. The howl contained no dignity. It sounded like a man shouting from 3 rooms away, if the man had paws, a tail, and a complete lack of political caution. "She said us," the wolf soul barked. The human words rang clearly in every mind nearby. Nerissa covered her glowing wrist with her other hand. "I did not." The wolf soul's tail swept through 3 moontime pots. "She did. Future husband. Us. We heard it. The moon heard it. Finally." Lady Caldris made a choking sound. Nerissa slowly removed the flower crown from her head and placed it on the table as if it might explode. "This is a gardening error." The wolf soul sat. Its tongue lolled. That was when King Aurelian Voss entered the herbarium. He wore a black morning coat with dark bone buttons, wolf iron clasps, and no silver anywhere. Silver was forbidden near royal skin. His raven hair was tied at the nape. His face had the severe beauty of a winter statue that had learned disappointment from humans. He looked at the open lilies. He looked at Lady Caldris. He looked at the wrecked seed pots. Then he looked at his wolf soul, which had placed 1 enormous paw on Nerissa's boot. "Var," the king said. The wolf soul did not move. No." Var's ears flattened for 1 breath. Then he leaned against Nerissa's leg. Nerissa almost fell into a tray of lunar basil. The king's eyes moved to her wrist. The moon mark pulsed. Nerissa pulled her sleeve down over it. The light shone through the plain fabric. That was unhelpful. Aurelian's expression did not change. His scent did. Beneath cedar, cold ironwood, and royal calm, something startled flashed bright and warm. His voice remained level. "Who spoke the binding phrase?" Every noble face turned toward Nerissa. She raised 1 hand halfway. Then she remembered Var's paw on her boot and lowered it for balance. "Technically," Nerissa said, "I spoke a joke." The wolf soul gave a delighted yip. Aurelian closed his eyes for 1 second. Nerissa understood that feeling. If she could have stepped out of her body and had a private meeting with her mouth, she would have done the same. The herbarium filled with guards, healers, moonlaw clerks, and 1 elderly priestess who arrived still holding a breakfast roll. Within minutes, the work table became a tribunal of flowers, panic, and crumbs. No one touched Nerissa's mark. That was good. No one knew what it meant. That was less good. The priestess, Mother Isolde, examined the glow through a lens made of polished moonstone. Her gray braids were pinned with white wood. Her rings were gold and bone. Even temple elders avoided silver around wolves. "It is temporary," Mother Isolde announced. Nerissa almost sagged with relief. Var whined as if the priestess had kicked him. Aurelian stood beside the herb table with his hands behind his back. "How temporary? 7 days." The relief vanished. Nerissa looked at her wrist. "That is a very long temporary." Mother Isolde took a bite of her roll and considered the mark. "It is a moon misherd," the room murmured. Nerissa did not like any sacred term that sounded like a clerical error. Aurelian's gaze sharpened. "Those are nursery tales. Most nursery tales are court records with better rhythm, the priestess replied. Var nodded wisely. He had no right to nod wisely after destroying time. Mother Isolde explained with the patience of a woman who had ruined many breakfasts for religion. Once in a rare moon phase, the goddess listened too literally. Words about fate, true names, bonds, vows, or future spouses could trigger a temporary sign if spoken near receptive lunar plants. Nerissa stared at the moon-dew lilies. The lilies glowed smugly. They are flowers, she said. They are sacred receivers, Mother Isolde corrected. Nerissa refused to be impressed. They receive fertilizer. Mother Isolde lifted one brow. And destiny. Nerissa glanced at the nearest exit. Can they return it? The priestess smiled. Not usually. Var placed his chin on Nerissa's knee. Aurelian gave the wolf soul a warning look. Var closed his eyes and pretended not to exist. That did not work. He was very large. Mother Isolde tapped the moonstone lens against her palm. The mark will fade after 7 days unless both hearts confirm the phrase as truth. Nerissa swallowed. Lady Caldress found her voice. Surely your majesty cannot be bound by a servant's joke. The herbarium chilled. Aurelian turned toward her slowly. Lady Caldress lowered her eyes too late. Nerissa expected the king to defend himself. Instead, he spoke with a calm that cut clean. No Omega in my palace is to be called a servant as an insult. The silence changed shape. Nerissa stared at him. So did Var, with open worship. Lady Caldress curtsied. Her cheeks flushed with anger and fear. Aurelian looked back at Mother Isolde. Can the mark be removed safely? Possibly. Nerissa breathed again. Mother Isolde ruined it. If the goddess agrees, it was only a joke. Var sneezed. It sounded judgmental. Nerissa pointed at him. He is not helping. The wolf soul gave her an adoring look. Aurelian's mouth tightened, as if a smile had tried to escape and been arrested. Var rarely helps quietly. Your Majesty, Nerissa managed. I am very sorry. Aurelian's voice stayed calm. For the joke? Nerissa rubbed her marked wrist. For the divine paperwork. That almost did it. The corner of his mouth moved. Var saw it and thumped his tail. 3 pots fell from the lower shelf. Nerissa winced. Aurelian looked at the broken pots. Then he looked at his wolf soul. You will replace those. Var's ears sank. Mother Isolde finished her roll. The 2 of you should remain within speaking distance until we understand the mark. Nerissa's stomach dropped. Aurelian's face went very still. Var stood so fast he knocked his head on the table. The priestess continued. If distance strains the mark, it may flare. If the flare crosses into wolf bond territory, it may become public. Everyone looked at Nerissa's glowing sleeve. It was already public. Nerissa tried to think of anything worse. Her mind provided an image of herself sitting beside the king at dinner while his wolf soul wore the future queen's flower crown. That was worse. Unfortunately, it was also possible. By noon, the palace knew. By noon and a half, the palace knew incorrectly. The first rumor claimed Nerissa had trapped the king with forbidden silver magic. That died quickly because silver magic would have put every werewolf in the room on the floor. The second rumor claimed she had secretly been a moon priestess. The third claimed Var had chosen her by eating her apron. Var had not eaten her apron. He had only carried it for 7 minutes. Nerissa followed Aurelian through the western corridor while trying to pull the apron from the wolf soul's mouth. Drop it! Var trotted beside her with bright eyes. Aurelian walked ahead with courtly dignity. It was a heroic amount of dignity under the circumstances. Nerissa lowered her voice. Your wolf has my apron. He knows. Nerissa eyed the stolen apron. Can you command him? Aurelian did not turn around. I am attempting to preserve the illusion that I can. That surprised a laugh from her. It was small. It escaped before she could stop it. Aurelian glanced back. The look lasted only a breath. It was enough to make the mark under her sleeve warm. Nerissa stopped laughing at once. Var dropped the apron on her boot and looked proud of himself. The king's private council room was not private for long. Mother Isolde arrived with moon charts. A moon law clerk arrived with ink on his nose. 2 healers arrived with salves, none of which could be applied because the mark did not burn. Aurelian's Aunt Mare Wynne arrived because no locked door had ever survived family curiosity. Aunt Merwin was tall, silver-haired, and wore a black gown with bone pins. No silver. Never silver. She looked at Nerissa, then at Var, then at the flower crown the wolf soul had somehow stolen from the herbarium. Aurelian, she said, you have had a busy morning. The king did not sit. Aunt. Var placed the flower crown at Nerissa's feet. Nerissa stepped away from it. The wolf soul pushed it closer. Aunt Merwin's eyes brightened with merciless joy. Nerissa understood at once that the king had survived wars, councils, and border raids, but might not survive this aunt. Mother Isolde spread 7 moon charts across the table. We need to reconstruct the sentence, the plants present, the emotional pressure, and the moon angle. Nerissa lifted a hand. Emotional pressure? The priestess nodded. The moon listens hardest when pride is bruised. Aunt Merwin looked at Lady Caldress, who had been summoned as a witness. Lady Caldress looked like a person who wished the moon had listened elsewhere. The questioning was formal. It was also humiliating. Nerissa had to repeat the sentence, twice. The first time, Aurelian stared at the moon charts. The second time, Var rolled onto his back. Mother Isolde made notes. The clerk's quill squeaked. Aunt Merwin asked whether the flower crown had suited Nerissa. Aurelian finally sat down. Nerissa stared at the table and considered becoming a fern. Ferns did not marry kings by accident. After 3 hours, the council reached 4 conclusions. First, the mark was temporary. Second, it could not be cut, covered, prayed away, or bribed. Third, it had chosen Nerissa's wrist because she had spoken the phrase while wearing the moonwake crown. Fourth, the goddess had terrible judgment about sarcasm. Mother Isolde objected to the 4th conclusion on theological grounds. Nerissa objected on personal grounds. Aurelian objected to nothing. He only looked at the mark, then at Var, then at Nerissa. His restraint was beginning to feel less cold and more careful. That realization was deeply inconvenient. The first day of the mark ended with a royal order. Nerissa was not to return to the shared Omega dormitory. The mark might flare if mocked or touched. Instead, she would stay in a small guest chamber beside the herbarium, guarded by palace healers and a very offended Var. She objected. Aurelian listened. That was new. Most nobles only waited for Omegas to stop making sound. When she finished, he folded his hands and gave his answer. Your safety is not a punishment. Nerissa wanted to argue. The sentence had no handle. Her chamber was warm, clean, and too pretty. White curtains hung around a narrow bed. A moonstone lamp glowed on a carved table. A window overlooked the herbarium roof, where steam curled from glass vents into the evening air. Var lay across the threshold. He had been told not to enter. He interpreted that as permission to block the world. Nerissa sat on the bed and looked at her glowing wrist. The mark pulsed softly. It did not hurt. It only hummed, like a secret pleased with itself. This is your fault, she told the mark. The mark brightened. Do not take compliments. Var's tail thumped outside. She looked at him. And you are worse. The wolf soul placed one paw over his nose. Nerissa did not want to laugh. She laughed anyway. On the second day, Aurelian came to the herbarium at dawn. Nerissa was already there. She had woken before sunrise, tired of staring at the ceiling and listening to Var breathe like a bellows outside her door. The herbarium needed watering. Plants did not care if their keeper had accidentally become a royal crisis. Mist rose from the troughs. Moondew lilies had closed again, but every bud tilted toward her as she passed. Do not start, she warned them. The king entered in a black riding coat. His crown was absent. His hair was tied back with a plain dark cord. Without the crown, he looked less like a statue and more like a man who had not slept enough. Var came behind him carrying a watering can. Nerissa stared. Aurelian also stared. The wolf soul placed the watering can beside her feet and sat proudly. He stole that, Aurelian said. Nerissa looked at the watering can. From whom? Aurelian sounded resigned. A gardener with strong lungs. The wolf soul sneezed. Nerissa picked up the can. It was made of blue enamel over iron, safe for wolf hands. No silver. Palace tools were inspected weekly, since even a silver handle could blister a careless werewolf. Thank you, she told Var. Var melted. The great black wolf slid sideways onto the tiles, overcome by praise. Aurelian looked at the ceiling. Nerissa watered a row of star thyme and tried not to enjoy this. The king had come to investigate. He asked about the crown frame, the flower batch, the timing of Lady Caldress's visit, and every plant within 6 steps of Nerissa's mouth. His questions were precise. His voice never rose. He did not crowd her. That made answering easier. It also made him harder to dislike. Nerissa preferred easy dislike. They found the first new sign near the lunar basil. The basil leaves had curled into tiny crescent shapes overnight. Mother Isolde said this meant the mark was listening. Nerissa said basil had no manners. Aurelian wrote both down, though only one was useful. During the inspection, Var kept trying to stand between them, not protectively, suggestively. He would nudge Aurelian closer, then nudge Nerissa closer, then sit back like a priest at a wedding. Nerissa pointed a pruning knife at him. The blade was ironwood and bone, sharp enough for stems but harmless to wolves. No matchmaking. Var placed one paw over his heart. Aurelian's eyes narrowed at the wolf soul. He says he is facilitating divine research. He can facilitate from 6 feet away. Var slumped. The king's mouth twitched. The mark warmed again. Nerissa hid it behind a tray of seedlings. Aurelian noticed. He did not mention it. By midday, the palace had produced more rumors. Nerissa heard 2 gardeners whispering that she had been born under a double moon. A scullery boy said Var had saluted her. Hessa claimed Nerissa had planned the whole thing by learning forbidden flower magic. The last rumor stung. Nerissa was used to being underestimated. Being accused of having enough power to trap a king was new. It would have been flattering if it did not sound dangerous. She found Hessa in the potting room, stacking clay trays. Hessa stiffened. I suppose you want my apology. Nerissa looked at the trays. I want you to stop putting damp trays on the dry shelf. That was not what Hessa expected. You have the king's wolf carrying your apron. Against my wishes. Hessa's fingers tightened on a clay tray. Everyone thinks you are special now. Nerissa picked up one damp tray and moved it. Everyone thought I was nothing yesterday. Hessa had no answer. Nerissa had not meant to sound hurt. That was the trouble with honest sentences. They wandered out without shoes. Hessa's face shifted. Not guilt, exactly. Something smaller, less polished. Before she could speak, Var shoved his head through the doorway with a mouthful of white velvet leaves. Nerissa closed her eyes. Where did you get those? Var's eyes slid left. The future queen's flower crown was missing half its trim. Hessa made a faint sound. Nerissa took the leaves from Var's mouth and pointed toward the main room. Go confess to the king. Var lowered his ears. Now. The wolf soul retreated. Hessa watched him go. He obeys you. Only when he is guilty. That is still more than most alphas. Nerissa nearly smiled. The apology came later. It was awkward, quiet, and delivered through a replacement spool of gold thread. Nerissa accepted it because holding grudges required energy, and she needed hers to survive a lovesick wolf soul. On the 3rd day, the mark flared during breakfast. Nerissa was not present at the royal table. She was in the herbarium with a bowl of porridge and a list of moon plants. Aurelian was 2 floors away in council. Mother Isolde was in the temple library. Var was supposed to be with the king. Supposed to be. The mark flashed bright enough to light Nerissa's spoon. 3 seconds later, Var burst into the herbarium, dragging a blue council sash behind him. Nerissa looked at the sash, then at Var. Did you leave a meeting? Var dropped the sash and barked one word into her mind. Bored. He was followed by Aurelian, 2 counselors, and Aunt Merwin, who looked delighted beyond decency. Aurelian's expression was calm. His hair was less calm. The mark flared, he said. Nerissa lifted her glowing wrist. I noticed. Did you say anything? I told my porridge it was loyal. Mother Isolde arrived behind the counselors, breathing hard and carrying a book large enough to flatten a goat. Loyalty words count, she warned. Nerissa looked at the porridge. The porridge looked innocent. Aurelian rubbed his brow. Var placed both front paws on the bench and examined the bowl. His nose wrinkled. He pushed it toward the king. Nerissa understood the gesture. He thinks you should eat. He thinks many things. He may be right about this one. The counselors stared at her. No one told the Alpha King to eat. Not in that tone. Not unless they were his aunt, his physician, or very close to death. Aurelian looked at the porridge. Then, with the air of a man entering battle, he took the spoon. Var wagged his tail. Aunt Merwin covered her mouth. One counselor whispered that the Omega had tamed the king. Nerissa heard him. So did Aurelian. He set the spoon down gently. No one in this room is tamed. Var licked porridge from the rim of the bowl. Aurelian added, some of us are poorly supervised. Nerissa laughed. The mark warmed again, but this time she did not hide it fast enough. Aurelian saw. His eyes softened by a fraction. That fraction was dangerous. The investigation deepened after Mother Isolde found an old record called the 7-Day Jest. It described 3 cases of moon-missured marks. One involved a baker who jokingly called a duke her sweet little husband during a flower fight. They had married 30 years later and terrorized 4 provinces with excellent bread. Nerissa did not find this comforting. The second case involved 2 guards, a gambling debt, and a moonlit dare. The mark faded after 7 days because both parties agreed they were better as friends. The moon accepted it, though it reportedly turned all their socks blue. The third case was incomplete. The pages after the 4th day were chewed. Mother Isolde blamed temple mice. Var looked guilty for reasons no one could explain. The missing pages sent them into the moon archive. Nerissa had never been allowed inside before. She had carried herb baskets to the side door and watched senior clerks take them with pinched faces. The archive belonged to historians, priests, royal lawyers, and people who thought dust made them important. Aurelian brought her through the main door. That alone caused a crisis. The moon archive was a long, vaulted hall beneath the eastern tower. Blue glass lamps hung from iron chains. The shelves rose higher than any ladder Nerissa trusted. The air smelled of old parchment, lamp oil, dry lavender, and the faint sourness of clerks who disliked surprises. Every hinge was brass. Every clasp was gold, iron, bone, or moonstone. Not one silver nail shone anywhere. A sign near the door read "No silver in the archive" in 4 languages. Under it, someone had added "or in the intern" in smaller script. Nerissa paused before the sign. Aurelian followed her gaze. There was an incident. Nerissa studied the warning sign. With an intern? Aurelian's answer was grave. With a bookmark. Nerissa matched his seriousness. That sounds terrible. The king nodded once. The intern agreed. Var tried to enter behind them and struck the doorway with one shoulder. The archive door was wide enough for people. It had not been designed for royal wolf souls in states of romantic vigilance. The chief archivist, Master Pell, turned pale. He was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the expression of a person who had been personally betrayed by sunlight. Your Majesty, he whispered, the wolf cannot enter the restricted stacks. Var lowered his muzzle. He was clearly preparing to look tragic. Nerissa pointed to the threshold. Stay. Var stayed. The entire archive watched. Aurelian also watched, though his face gave away nothing. Master Pell swallowed. Remarkable. Nerissa explained the miracle carefully. He is motivated by guilt. Var sighed across the floor. They spent the morning searching for references to moon-missured marks. Aurelian read old court indexes. Mother Isolde muttered at temple copies. Nerissa worked through practical plant records because sacred flowers were her problem now, apparently by divine appointment and bad timing. The humor of the archive was quiet at first. Then Var discovered that he could slide his nose under the door and blow air across the floor. Loose note slips fluttered. Master Pell made a wounded sound. Var did it again. Nerissa looked up from a ledger. If you scatter one more note, I will tell the gardeners you enjoy wearing flower crowns. The nose vanished. Aurelian turned a page. He says that was unnecessary. Nerissa turned a page. So was the note storm. Aurelian translated without looking up. He says he was helping. Nerissa looked toward the door. With wind? Aurelian paused, listening. He is not specific. Mother Isolde found the first useful record in a marriage dispute from 200 years earlier. A stable boy had told a brewer's daughter that she was his moon in trouble during a cider contest. A temporary mark appeared on both their elbows. Their families argued for 7 days about whether trouble counted as a sacred category. It did not. The mark faded after both admitted they loved each other but preferred separate businesses. Nerissa took careful notes. Aurelian asked why. Because the moon accepted friendship. That comforts you? Nerissa tapped the record. It gives the moon at least one sensible day in history. The king leaned over the record. His shoulder almost brushed hers. He stopped before contact. Nerissa noticed the restraint, just as she had noticed all the other small restraints. He never touched her mark. He never used alpha pressure. He never let Var's wild enthusiasm become an excuse. That made her safer. It also made her more aware of him. Awareness was the opposite of safe. By lunch, Master Pell had warmed to the crisis because it involved indexes. He brought them a tray of archive-approved food. Archive-approved food meant dry bread, hard cheese, and apples so stern they could have chaired a committee. Var stared through the cracked door. Nerissa handed him an apple. He accepted it delicately, then spat it out. Master Pell looked offended on behalf of fruit. Aurelian picked up the apple, examined the bite, and set it aside. He says it tastes like legal argument. It does, Nerissa admitted. Master Pell made another wounded sound. The second useful record came from a queen who once jokingly called her own reflection my only loyal spouse while wearing a ceremonial veil. The mirror fogged for a week. Her actual husband slept in the East Wing until the moon priest declared reflections unfit for marriage. Aunt Merwin arrived halfway through the reading and laughed so hard she had to sit beside a genealogy shelf. Aurelian did not laugh. His eyes did, which was worse. Nerissa pretended not to notice. The archive did not solve the mark. It did change the question. Moon-missured signs were not commands. They were invitations to clarify truth. The goddess listened badly, but she also allowed correction. Nerissa wrote that sentence 3 times. Clarification mattered. Choice mattered. She looked at the king while he spoke softly with Mother Isolde. The blue archive light made the edges of his hair look almost black blue. His face was still severe. Yet severity looked different after a man had translated his wolf soul's opinion of apples. Var pushed his nose under the door again. This time a note slid toward Nerissa. She picked it up. The note had been written by someone with ink on his paw and no respect for spelling. It showed a crude drawing of a flower crown, a stick figure omega, and a wolf soul with many hearts around it. Nerissa turned toward Aurelian. The king looked at the note. Then he looked at Var. He claims it is evidence. Nerissa turned the drawing around. Of what? Aurelian's tone was dry. Of his innocence. Nerissa inspected the hearts. This is not innocence. This is a crime with hearts. Var whined. Nerissa tucked the note into her ledger. She told herself she saved it as evidence. That was the first lie she told that day. The second came that evening, when Hessa asked whether the archive had helped. Nerissa said it had mostly produced dust. She did not mention the wolf drawing. She did not mention the way Aurelian had held a ladder steady without making her feel watched. She did not mention how he had moved a brass lamp because the heat bothered her wrist. Those details were not evidence. They were worse. They were kindnesses. On the same day, Aurelian faced his council with the moon-matured records stacked beside him. Nerissa did not attend. She heard about it later from Aunt Merwin, who reported court drama the way other people reported weather. Lord Calthor wanted the mark declared void. Mother Isolde asked whether he planned to argue with the moon in person. Lady Caldress's uncle wanted Nerissa removed from palace service. Aurelian asked whether the palace should remove every person who had ever made a joke near flowers. The chamber had gone silent. Then Var carried in the archive apple and dropped it in front of Lord Calthor. No one knew what that meant. Var looked satisfied anyway. Aurelian ended the council by ordering that no one speak to Nerissa about marriage, rank, purity, bloodline, or divine mistakes without permission. He also ordered every moon plant in the palace inspected for unusual sensitivity. The gardeners loved the second order. The nobles hated the first. Var loved both. On the fourth morning, the palace tried to test the mark with controlled phrases. This was Mother Isolde's idea. Nerissa called it sacred poking. The test took place in the small West Conservatory. It had fewer plants and more exits. Aurelian stood on one side of the table. Nerissa stood on the other. Mother Isolde sat between them with a moonstone pendulum, 3 notebooks, and the expression of a woman who had decided breakfast was less important than trouble. Var was told to remain outside. He put his eye to the keyhole. Aunt Merwin sat in the corner with tea. She had not been invited. No one had the courage to say so. Mother Isolde began with harmless statements. Nerissa declared that she intended to water the basil. Nothing happened. Aurelian declared that he intended to review border taxes. The basil wilted slightly. Nerissa decided that was not supernatural. It was taste. Then Mother Isolde moved to relationship terms. Nerissa said the king was her employer. The mark stayed dim. Aurelian said Nerissa was a palace herbarium assistant. The mark flickered as if offended by insufficient detail. Mother Isolde wrote quickly. Nerissa said Var was a vandal. The door whined. The mark did not react. Aurelian said Var was trying his best. The door thumped once. Aunt Merwin hid a smile in her cup. Then Mother Isolde cleared her throat. Now, a stronger phrase. Nerissa did not like the sound of that. Say that King Aurelian is not your future husband. Nerissa looked at the priestess. Aurelian's posture changed by 1 careful inch. Var's eye vanished from the keyhole. The room waited. Nerissa opened her mouth. No sound came. It was not magic. The mark did not stop her. The moon did not close her throat. She simply could not say it without knowing whether she meant it. That was more frightening. She reached for irritation because it was familiar. This is a bad test. Mother Isolde nodded. Excellent data. The data is embarrassed. Embarrassment is often honest. Aurelian stepped back from the table. We stop. Nerissa looked at him. He did not ask why she had failed to say it. He did not look pleased. He looked protective of the space around her answer. The mark warmed. Mother Isolde made a small, satisfied noise. No, Nerissa warned. The priestess wrote faster. The test ended early because Var became tired of the keyhole and pushed the door open with his head. He entered wearing a vine across his muzzle, which he had somehow acquired from the hallway. Nerissa removed the vine. Var leaned into her hands. Aurelian looked away, but not before she saw longing cross his face. Not for the touch itself, for the ease of it. His wolf soul had no fear of wanting. The king had too much. That afternoon, Nerissa visited the Omega dormitory. She should not have done it. The healers preferred her in guarded rooms. Aurelian's order made her safety a palace matter. Mother Isolde wanted her within shouting distance of moon charts. Nerissa went anyway. She had lived in the South Dormitory for 4 years. Her narrow bed stood under the window. Her extra dress hung behind the door. Her tin cup sat on the shelf, scratched near the rim. A person did not stop belonging to a room just because the moon had developed poor listening habits. The dormitory went silent when she entered. 6 Omegas looked up from mending, polishing, and late breakfast. Then all 6 looked at her wrist. The mark glowed faintly beneath her sleeve. Nerissa lifted her chin. If anyone bows, I will throw a pillow. That helped. Pella, who worked in the kitchens, burst into tears. She had been convinced Nerissa would be sent away. Joran, the youngest lamp attendant, asked whether Var truly ate ceremonial flowers. Two others wanted to know whether the king was as terrifying up close. Nerissa considered the question. He is less terrifying with porridge. The dormitory erupted. The laughter loosened something in the room. Fear turned into gossip. Gossip turned into questions. Questions became biscuits stolen from the kitchen and tea brewed too strong. Nerissa sat on her old bed and told them what was safe to tell. The mark was temporary. The king had not claimed her. Var was dramatic. Lady Caldress had not been eaten by plants, though Nerissa understood the appeal. The Omegas listened. What they did not ask mattered more. They did not ask whether she had trapped him. They did not ask whether she deserved him. They asked whether she was scared. Nerissa held the warm cup between both hands. The dormitory smelled of soap, wool, cheap lavender oil, and 6 lives lived close together. The scents steadied her. Yes, she admitted. No one laughed. Pella moved closer. Joran placed a biscuit on Nerissa's knee. It was slightly burnt and therefore heartfelt. Nerissa told herself she was not going to cry over a biscuit. She came close. When Aurelian found her there an hour later, he did not enter the dormitory. He stood outside the open door with Var at his side and waited until she noticed him. That restraint did something to the room. The Omegas noticed. Nerissa noticed them noticing. Aurelian bowed his head slightly. Mother I sold lost you. I was not misplaced. She disagrees. Aurelian's expression softened. She often does. Var carried a folded shawl in his mouth. It was Nerissa's old shawl from the herbarium. He had brought it as if rescuing a wounded soldier. Joran whispered that the wolf soul was enormous. Var preened. Pella whispered that he was handsome. Var preened harder. Aurelian closed his eyes. Nerissa took the shawl before the wolf could start a cult. Thank you. Var lay down in the corridor with the air of a martyr rewarded. The dormitory loved him at once. That became a problem. For the next day, Omegas from 3 palace wings left small treats outside the herbarium, not for Nerissa, for Var. Dried meat, honey cakes, a knitted ball. One note asked whether he preferred star thyme or basil. Var accepted all offerings. Aurelian ordered him to stop. Var brought the offerings to Nerissa instead. Nerissa returned most of them. She kept the knitted ball because it looked like Var and had one crooked ear. When Aurelian saw it on her work table, he stared for several seconds. Is that my wolf soul? It was a gift. Pella held up the toy. It has a crooked ear. Nerissa looked at the stuffed wolf. So does his judgment. Var took the ball, placed it between his paws, and rested his chin on it. Aurelian looked betrayed by both of them. Nerissa laughed until the mark warmed. That warmth scared her less now. On the 5th afternoon, Aurelian asked her to walk through the moon court. Not ordered, asked. The difference had become a language. The moon court sat open to the sky at the heart of the palace. Stone arches circled a dry fountain. White night flowers climbed the walls. The air smelled of cool stone, damp petals, and distant bread from the kitchens. Var was not with them. Nerissa noticed immediately. Aurelian noticed her noticing. He is with Aunt Merwin. Is that safe? For whom? Nerissa considered Aunt Merwin's smile. Either of them, Aurelian answered after a beat. No, they walked beneath the arches. The palace noise softened behind them. For the first time since the mark appeared, no one watched from behind a plant, door, window, or keyhole. At least, no one obvious. Nerissa had learned not to underestimate aunts. Aurelian stopped beside the dry fountain. Its basin was carved with moons in every phase. The stone was moonstone, not silver. It glowed faintly where the last light touched it. When I was crowned, he said, my council advised me to keep Var hidden during courtship negotiations. Nerissa looked at him. Why? They said he made me look less controlled. He does. Aurelian accepted the charge. Yes, Nerissa watched his profile. They were not wrong. The king's voice stayed quiet. No. Nerissa waited. Aurelian looked up through the open roof. They were still mistaken. Var embarrasses me because he wants without strategy. He also knows when I am lying to myself. That sounded familiar. Nerissa traced one carved moon on the fountain rim. I thought the mark embarrassed me because it made everyone look at me. And now? Now I think it embarrassed me because everyone saw a desire before I understood it. The admission left her quietly. No lightning struck. No lilies opened, mostly because there were no lilies nearby. The mark warmed with soft light. Aurelian did not move closer. His restraint had become almost unbearable. Nerissa looked at him. You may say something. I am considering several unsafe options. Choose a medium one. His eyes warmed. I want the mark to fade if it keeps you free. That was not medium. It was devastating. Nerissa looked away before her face gave too much back. He continued, voice low. I also want the chance to ask for what the mark guessed badly. That was the medium option? No, that was the honest one. The choice mark did not exist yet. The temporary crescent still circled her wrist, bright and uncertain. Nerissa touched the edge of it with her thumb. I do not know what I will say on the 7th day. Aurelian accepted the uncertainty. I know. Nerissa searched his face. Does that frighten you? His answer was immediate. Yes. The word was plain. No kingly polish. No strategy. Only truth standing in a moon court, looking tired and brave. Nerissa's heart turned over. Then Var howled from somewhere beyond the west arch. Aunt Merwin shouted, He stole the custard! Aurelian's head lowered. Nerissa pressed both hands over her mouth. Do not laugh, he warned. She failed. The mark flashed. Aurelian sighed. From that moment, the moon court became her favorite place in the palace. Aurelian ordered a search for another copy. Nerissa returned to the herbarium with 3 books, 2 moon charts, and a headache. She was beginning to understand the mark. It did not force affection. It exposed pressure. Every time she and Aurelian drifted toward honesty, it warmed. Every time they hid behind rank or jokes, it cooled. Var reacted before either human could lie well. That made her life much less tidy. It was also humiliatingly useful. On the 4th day, Aurelian joined her in the West Glass House to test the theory. The room held night-blooming plants and smelled of damp soil, vanilla moss, and stormwater. Moonlight filtered through blue glass. The palace noise felt far away. Var was banned from the room for chewing a research ribbon. He lay outside with his nose under the door. Aurelian stood beside a table of moon violets. Mother I sold believes the mark responds to truth. Then it should have faded when I said I was joking. Were you entirely joking? Nerissa froze. The question had no cruelty in it. That made it harder. She looked down at the moon violets. Their petals were dark purple with pale centers. They trembled in the glasshouse draft. I was angry, she admitted. I was embarrassed. They made me feel small, so I said the largest thing I could think of. Me. Nerissa kept her eyes on the fountain. Your title. Aurelian's question was careful. Not me? She looked up. Aurelian's expression was still controlled, but not cold. The distinction mattered now. Coldness pushed away. Control held himself back. Nerissa remembered him defending her before Lady Caldress. She remembered him eating porridge because his wolf soul and a low omega had both judged his breakfast habits. She remembered every moment he had not touched her mark without permission. I did not know you, she said. And now? The mark pulsed. Outside the door, Var made a strangled sound. Nerissa tried to glare through the wood. No commentary! Aurelian's gaze stayed on her. She exhaled slowly. Now I know you are not only a crown. That is irritating. I have been called worse. By me? Aurelian's honesty came without armor. Not yet. The smile escaped him this time. It was small, quick, and devastating. The moon violets opened. Nerissa looked at them. Traitors! The mark flared bright. Var howled from the hallway. Several gardeners shouted. Aurelian leaned one hand on the table and looked at the flowers as if they had joined a conspiracy. The plants like honesty. The plants like drama. Nerissa glanced toward the palace. So does Var. Aurelian looked pained. Var thinks a watering can is courtship. The king's smile remained. Nerissa had no defense against that at all. The fifth day brought a problem no one expected. The mark stopped glowing. For one breath, Nerissa thought it had faded early. Relief struck first. Then, disappointment followed so fast she nearly dropped a tray of seedlings. The disappointment scared her. Aurelian arrived minutes later, called by Mother Isolde. Var came pressed against his side, quiet for once. Nerissa lifted her wrist. The crescent was still visible, but dim. Mother Isolde frowned. It is not fading, it is waiting. For what? A contradiction. Nerissa's gaze went to Aurelian. He looked back. They had spent 4 days explaining the mark as a mistake. They had been polite. They had been careful. They had been very reasonable people facing divine nonsense. Reason had begun to feel like cowardice wearing clean shoes. The contradiction arrived at the midsummer rehearsal. The moonwake crown had to be repaired. Var had eaten half the velvet leaves, and Hessa had spent 2 nights replacing them with gold thread and moondew petals. The crown was ready for the banquet table again. Lady Caldress was also ready. She had lost ground since the first day. That made her more dangerous, not less. In the banquet hall, before witnesses, she smiled at Nerissa and spoke softly enough to sound kind. The mark is almost gone, I hear. You must be relieved to return to the herbarium. Nerissa was holding a tray of moon-violet garlands. Aurelian stood across the hall with his counsel. Var stood beside him, watching Lady Caldress with flat eyes. Nerissa could have ignored her. She nearly did. Then Lady Caldress glanced at the flower crown. Perhaps next time, do not practice wearing what you cannot keep. The old heat rose again. This time, it did not burn as shame. It burned clean. Nerissa placed the tray on the table. I do not want what I cannot choose. Lady Caldress's smile faltered. And if something chooses me without asking? Nerissa continued. I am allowed to ask questions before bowing to it. The banquet hall quieted. Aurelian turned fully. The dim mark brightened. Lady Caldress lowered her voice. Careful, Omega. Var growled. Aurelian did not. He only walked across the hall. Every step was calm. Every noble watched him. When he reached Nerissa, he did not stand in front of her. He stood beside her. That difference moved through the room. Nerissa Vale is under royal protection, he said. Lady Caldress curtsied, stiff with fury. Because of the mark? Because she is mine to protect. The mark flashed. Nerissa's breath caught. Aurelian went still. Var's tail began to wag with terrible hope. Mother Isolde, at the far end of the hall, muttered something that sounded like breakfast being ruined again. Nerissa turned to Aurelian. Your Majesty. His voice lowered. I chose that word poorly. Did you? The whole hall seemed to lean closer. His eyes held hers. The mask of the king was still there, but the man behind it had stepped to the edge. No, he said. I chose it carefully. I only should have asked whether you wanted it spoken. That was the moment everything changed. Not because he had said mine, because he had corrected himself, because he had not used the mark as permission, because Var, for once, did not jump between them. The wolf soul sat quietly, shaking with the effort of hope. Nerissa looked at her glowing wrist. 7 days, Mother Isolde had said. 7 days until the joke vanished unless 2 hearts confirmed it. Nerissa had spent her life being chosen for tasks. Chosen to scrub root trays, chosen to carry baskets, chosen as the easy target for noble laughter. She had never trusted being chosen by power. Aurelian waited. That was new too. She lifted her chin. I do not belong to the mark. No, I do not belong to your wolf. Var whined softly. Aurelian glanced at him. He is learning, slowly, painfully. The mark warmed, but Nerissa smiled despite herself. And I do not belong to you because a goddess misunderstood sarcasm. Aurelian bowed his head. I know. Good. She picked up the moonwake crown. The repaired leaves trembled beneath her fingers. Then she placed it on the banquet table, not on her head. Then if you want me near you, she said, ask me when the mark is gone. Var collapsed onto the floor. Not dramatically. Completely. The banquet hall gasped. Aurelian looked down at his wolf soul. He is alive. Var opened one eye and groaned. Nerissa pressed her lips together. The king's aunt began laughing first. By evening, the court knew two things. The Omega had refused to be claimed by a supernatural accident. The Alpha King had not denied wanting to ask. Before evening actually arrived, however, the palace tried to rehearse the midsummer blessing. That was how Nerissa learned that a palace could survive border raids, winter fever, and one tax riot, yet still lose all reason over table flowers. The great hall had been cleared for practice. Servants rolled long tables into place. Gardeners carried trays of moon-dew lilies. Musicians tuned lutes near the west wall. Priests marked the blessing path with chalk made from crushed moonstone. No silver appeared anywhere. Mother Weisold inspected every clasp, pin, pitcher, and knife with grim focus. Nerissa did not know the story behind that expression. She decided she did not need it before lunch. Aurelian stood at the high table, listening to instructions from the steward. He looked like a king again. That should have comforted Nerissa. Instead, it made her notice the tiny shift in his jaw when a counselor mentioned the future queen's entrance. It made her notice how his fingers flexed once behind his back. It made her notice Var lying under the high table with his paws over his eyes. The wolf soul was not helping. The steward cleared his throat and pointed to the center aisle. At the blessing, the chosen lady will cross here. Every noble woman in the hall looked slightly taller. Nerissa looked at the nearest exit. Var peeked between his paws. The steward continued with brave stupidity. The Moonwake crown will be lifted by the senior herbarium attendant and placed upon the lady's head. Hessa straightened so fast that her apron strings snapped. Nerissa kept her face calm. Inside, she was performing a small funeral for common sense. Mother Ysolde noticed the mood and frowned. This is only a rehearsal. The moon-dew lilies all turned toward Nerissa. That did not improve the mood. A gardener dropped a tray. Var's tail swept beneath the high table and knocked over 3 rolled napkins. They bounced down the day steps with more dignity than the court. Aurelian caught one with his boot. The hall stared. He looked at the napkin as if it had betrayed the crown. Nerissa bit the inside of her cheek. The king lifted the napkin and handed it to a footman. Continue! The footman accepted it like a relic. The steward tried again. He arranged Nerissa beside the crown table because she knew the flowers. He arranged Lady Caldress opposite her because the court enjoyed testing Nerissa's patience like a weather vane in a storm. Lady Caldress smiled with careful sweetness. Nerissa recognized that sweetness. It was the kind used to hide poison in tea or bad intentions in compliments. The steward gave the signal. Hessa lifted the moonwake crown. The crown leaned left. Nerissa felt personally accused. Hessa walked 3 steps, tripped on a chalk moon, and nearly sent the future queen's crown into the soup tureen. There was no soup yet. The tureen had arrived early, apparently to witness disaster. Nerissa moved without thinking. She caught the crown by the gold thread. Aurelian caught the tureen. Var leapt from beneath the high table and slid across the polished floor like an enormous spiritual rug. He stopped under Hessa's falling feet. Hessa landed on his back. For one breathtaking second, the senior flower attendant rode the Alpha King's wolf soul across the great hall. No one screamed. Everyone wanted to. The musicians stopped tuning. One lute string broke by itself. Var slid to a halt beside the moonstone chalk path, deeply offended and covered in star time. Hessa climbed off him with the face of a woman who had just met her own obituary. Aurelian held the empty tureen in both hands. Nerissa held the crown. Lady Caldress held nothing, which seemed to offend her more than danger. Mother Ysolde shut her eyes. The moon tests us. Aunt Merwin's voice drifted from a side bench. The floor helped. The court broke into strained laughter. Nerissa placed the crown back on the table. Her hands shook only a little. The gold thread had not snapped. The moon-dew lilies looked smug. Aurelian set down the tureen. His eyes found Nerissa across the mess. Concern came first, not embarrassment, not anger, not worry about witnesses, concern for her. The mark on Nerissa's wrist warmed under her glove. She tucked her hand against her skirt. Var rose from the floor with a spray of crushed star-thyme. The herb clung to his ears like a festival garland. He looked at Nerissa with great pride, as if he had planned the rescue. Aurelian translated with reluctance. He says he prevented a royal tragedy. Nerissa looked at the wolf soul's thyme-covered head. He became one. Var sneezed. More thyme flew into Lord Calthor's sleeve. Lord Calthor made a sound no court composer would ever set to music. The rehearsal did not improve. The second attempt failed when the moon-dew lilies leaned away from Lady Caldress. The third attempt failed when Var tried to sit on the chalk moon and erased half the blessing path. The fourth attempt failed because Mother Isolde asked everyone to repeat the vow of communal peace. Communal peace lasted exactly 12 seconds. Lady Caldress lifted her chin and declared that the future queen should come from noble blood. The nearest moonvine shed every leaf at once. Leaves pattered onto the floor like polite applause from plants with opinions. Nerissa bent to gather them. Aurelian bent at the same time. Their hands stopped above the same leaf. Neither touched. The pause was small. The court noticed it anyway. Nerissa picked up a different leaf. Aurelian picked up the first one and placed it in her basket. Var made a muffled sound. He had shoved his whole muzzle beneath Aunt Merwin's shawl to keep from interfering. The shawl now had ears. Nerissa nearly lost the battle with laughter. Aurelian's mouth twitched. That tiny movement did something reckless to the air between them. Lady Caldress saw it too. Her expression sharpened. She stepped closer to the crown table. Perhaps the flowers are reacting to scandal. Nerissa kept collecting leaves. They react to poor soil, stale water, and excessive perfume. A gardener coughed into his sleeve. Lady Caldress ignored him. You speak boldly for someone whose mark came from a joke. The hall's amusement thinned. Var pulled his head from the shawl. Aurelian straightened. Nerissa did not. She stayed crouched with leaves in her hands because standing too quickly would make the whole hall think she had been struck. She had not been struck. She had been reminded. There was a difference. The mark was not the only thing people misunderstood. Rank could be misunderstood too. Quiet could be mistaken for consent. Kindness could be mistaken for weakness. And Omega's patience could be mistaken for permission to keep pushing. Nerissa placed the leaves in the basket. Then she stood. Her voice came out steady. My joke was foolish. Lady Caldress smiled. Nerissa continued before the smile could settle. Your cruelty is practiced. The hall went silent. The moonvine behind Lady Caldress dropped one last leaf. It landed in her hair. Aunt Merwin whispered to no one, excellent timing. Aurelian did not step in front of Nerissa. He stood where he was, letting her words hold their own weight. That mattered. Lady Caldress touched the leaf in her hair and turned pale with anger. Nerissa felt the familiar old fear rise. It knew the shape of punishment. It knew laundry duty, lost meals, and whispers in sleeping rooms. It knew how power smiled before it closed a door. Then she looked at Aurelian. He was watching her, not as a king waiting to rescue an Omega, but as a man ready to respect how she rescued herself. The fear did not vanish. It became smaller. Nerissa lifted the basket. Now, if the court has finished arguing with plants, the crown needs repair again. Var barked once. The sound bounced through the hall. Several nobles flinched. Aurelian's voice stayed even. The rehearsal is suspended. The steward looked relieved enough to marry the word suspended. Aurelian turned to the room. The midsummer blessing will not be used to measure bloodline. Lord Calthor opened his mouth. Var placed the archive apple at his feet. No one knew where the wolf soul had been keeping it. No one asked. Lord Calthor closed his mouth. Nerissa carried the crown back to the herbarium with 3 gardeners, 1 nervous footman, and Var padding behind her like a repentant thundercloud. Aurelian did not follow at first. He stayed in the hall and spoke to the court. Nerissa heard only the lower murmur of his voice through the corridor stones. She could not make out every word, but she heard the shape of authority. Firm, cold, final. It should have frightened her. Instead, it steadied the air behind her. The herbarium welcomed her with wet leaf scent and warm glass. The damaged crown went onto the central work table. A moondew lily had torn at the stem. 2 velvet leaves had twisted. Star time clung to the gold thread as if Var had signed his name on the disaster. Nerissa removed each crushed piece with careful fingers. The gardeners drifted away after a while. Hessa lingered near the door. Her face had lost some of its sharpness. Shame did not make her kinder yet, but it made her quieter. That was a start. Nerissa expected another jab. Instead, Hessa looked at the crown. I did not mean to fall on the wolf. Var sat outside the herbarium doors. He gave a long theatrical sigh. Nerissa glanced at him. He doubts your sincerity, Hessa swallowed. I doubt his steering. That was fair. Nerissa lowered her scissors. For years, Hessa had treated every small advantage like a loaf of bread in famine. More favor, better tasks, closer access to nobles, a chance not to be the lowest person in the room. Nerissa understood that hunger, even when she hated what it did to people. Hessa's fingers twisted in her apron. The silence stretched. Nerissa did not fill it for her. At last, Hessa spoke again. Lady Caldris told me you would leave service if the mark held. She says many things. Nerissa kept her eyes on the flower stem. Hessa's voice thinned. I believed that one. There it was. Not apology yet. A little root pushing through hard soil. Nerissa set a repaired lily back into place. If I leave one day, I want it to be because I chose a wider life, not because a noble woman frightened me out of a room. Hessa nodded once. Then she looked at Var, who had pressed his face against the glass door. His nose flattened. His dignity suffered. Hessa's mouth twitched. Does he always look like that? Only when he wants sympathy. Does it work? Nerissa gave the wolf soul a stern look. Var widened his golden eyes. Unfortunately, she admitted. Hessa made a small sound that might have been a laugh. It was not friendship. Not yet. It was one less thorn. When Hessa left, Aurelian entered with a tray. The tray held tea, bread, cheese, sliced pears, and absolutely no bitten sandwiches. Nerissa looked at it with suspicion. Aurelian set it on the side table. Var was searched. The wolf soul looked outraged. By whom? 3 guards and a cook with standards. Nerissa picked up a pear slice, a rare alliance. Aurelian's gaze moved over the damaged crown. I am sorry for the rehearsal. Which part? The floor, the flowers, the nobles, the apple, or my wolf's career as furniture? Nerissa took in the list. That is a long apology. Aurelian spread one hand. I rule a large kingdom. She laughed, then caught herself. His eyes warmed. The room seemed to notice. The moondew lilies tilted toward them with the shamelessness of court gossip. Nerissa pointed a pear slice at the plants. Stop that. The lilies did not. Aurelian followed her glare and looked at the nearest bloom. They do not obey me. They have taste. Should I be offended? Nerissa pointed the pear slice at him. Only if you wish to argue with flowers. Aurelian considered the lilies. I have watched my counsel. Flowers may be more reasonable. Var huffed from the doorway. Aurelian listened, then sighed. He says flowers also understand courtship. Nerissa almost choked on the pear. Aurelian looked deeply tired. I did not ask him. You rarely do. He rarely waits. That should have been only funny. Instead, it softened into something more. Var's impatience had been a problem for 6 days. So had the moons. So had the courts. Everyone wanted an answer from Nerissa before she could breathe around the question. Aurelian, for all his cold power, kept stopping at the edge of asking. He did not step closer now. He only looked at the crown and the torn leaves. I spoke to Lady Caldris. Nerissa cut a loose thread. Did the plants survive? Barely. Did she? Aurelian gave the plants a diplomatic look. Also barely. Nerissa should not have smiled. She did anyway. Aurelian's mouth curved, then faded. She will not supervise the herbarium again. Nerissa set down the scissors. That was not a small thing. Lady Caldris's family funded 3 winter roads and half the North Barracks. Removing her from any royal duty would annoy more than one polished ancestor. Aurelian saw her calculation. His voice became quieter. Do not make my politics smaller to protect my comfort. I was making sure you knew the cost. I know. Nerissa searched his face. And you still did it? The answer was plain. Yes. The answer had no flourish. That made it heavier. Nerissa touched the torn lily. Its petals were cool and damp. Because of me? Aurelian did not answer at once. The glass roof ticked softly as rain began again. Somewhere beyond the herbarium, servants dragged rehearsal tables back into place. The palace kept moving around them, full of duties that did not care whether hearts were careful. At last, Aurelian spoke. Because of what was wrong before you. Nerissa looked up. He stood with his hands clasped behind him, every line controlled. Yet, the control felt tired now, not cold. I have accepted too many small cruelties as court weather, he said. They were not storms, they were choices. I let them remain because larger dangers always came first. Var's proud head dipped. Aurelian's gaze shifted to the wolf soul, then returned to Nerissa. You made the small cruelties impossible to ignore. Her throat tightened. She had expected desire to be dangerous. She had not expected respect to be worse. Respect entered quietly. It moved furniture in the heart. It found rooms she had locked from the inside and opened windows. Nerissa picked up the gold thread again. Her fingers were steadier now. Then do not fix only the cruelty aimed at me, she said. Aurelian listened. So she told him about the Omega dormitory's broken window latch. She told him about the winter gloves that always arrived late. She told him about servants assigned to noble rooms where insults were treated as part of wages. She did not make a speech. She repaired the crown while she spoke. That made the telling easier. Aurelian did not interrupt. He did not promise impossible miracles. He asked 3 practical questions and wrote the answers on the back of a banquet schedule. Var watched the writing with grave interest. When Aurelian finished, Nerissa pointed at the paper. Do not let him eat that. This is royal policy now. That has never stopped him. Var looked offended by history. Aurelian folded the paper and placed it inside his coat. The policy will survive. Your confidence is touching. My coat has inner buttons. Nerissa checked the matter at once. Bone? Aurelian tapped the button. Bone. She approved with a nod. The exchange was ordinary. That was why it hurt. For 6 days, the palace had treated Nerissa like a question. Was she chosen? Was she dangerous? Was she lucky? Was she a joke? With Aurelian in that warm glass room, she became a person again. A tired person with pollen on her sleeve and opinions about window latches. The mark glowed softly, not loudly, not like a command, like agreement. By late afternoon, Mother Weisold arrived carrying a stack of temple notes and the expression of someone losing a long argument with paper. Aunt Merwin followed with a basket of pastries. That meant the matter was either serious or hungry. Usually both. Mother Weisold set the notes beside the repaired crown. I found another reference. Nerissa's stomach dipped. Aurelian's face closed by a careful inch. Var sniffed the pastry basket. Aunt Merwin slapped his nose with a folded napkin. The wolf soul looked betrayed. Mother Weisold ignored them. A moon-matured sign becomes dangerous only when one party mistakes it for ownership. We knew that, Nerissa said. We suspected it. The priestess tapped the notes. Now I know it. Aurelian's eyes sharpened. What changes? Mother Isolde looked at Nerissa first. That courtesy mattered. At dawn, the mark will ask for truth, she explained. It will not ask for surrender. If both of you deny the feeling, it fades. If one of you claims the other, it breaks badly. If both of you ask for time, it may change into something rarer. Aunt Merwin offered Nerissa a pastry. Nerissa took it because panic was easier with sugar. Aurelian stayed still. Rarer? Mother Isolde's mouth tightened. A choice mark. The air changed. Even the lilies stopped pretending not to listen. Nerissa looked at her wrist. What does it do? Very little. That was not the answer anyone expected from a priestess. Mother Isolde seemed pleased by their confusion. It is not a mate bond. It is not a claim. It does not command touch, marriage, obedience, or desire. Then why would the moon make it? To remember a promise freely made. The mark warmed under Nerissa's glove. Aurelian looked at the glow and then away, as if even seeing it too long might become pressure. Nerissa noticed. Of course she noticed. He had spent 6 days teaching her how restraint could be a language. Aunt Merwin bit into a pastry. My generation would have saved everyone trouble by writing that on the first page. Mother Isolde gave her a cold look. Your generation stored sacred records near mice. The mice were devout. Var barked once. Aurelian translated after a long pause. He says the mice were suspicious. He is not wrong, Mother Isolde admitted. The seriousness loosened. Nerissa needed that. Her thoughts had begun racing toward dawn, toward choice, toward the terrifying possibility that the mark might not be the problem anymore. The problem might be that she wanted to keep something, not a claim, not a crown, a chance. Mother Isolde gathered her notes. There is one more rule. Everyone became still again. The priestess looked between them. No final answer before dawn. The mark must fade as far as it can. Whatever remains must be chosen in the quiet after fear. Nerissa absorbed that. Aurelian nodded once. Then I will not ask tonight. Var made a sound like a door hinge losing hope. Aunt Merwin handed him a pastry. He brightened. Nerissa stared. He can eat temple pastry? It has no silver leaf, Aunt Merwin said. Mother Isolde looked offended. No temple pastry has silver leaf. Not since the cufflink Earl. Nerissa decided, again, not to ask. After the priestess left, the herbarium became almost quiet. Almost was the best any room could manage with Var outside the glass and Aunt Merwin eating pastry. An Alpha King also stood beside a flower crown that had survived more public trouble than several minor lords. Nerissa repaired the last torn leaf in silence. She used a needle made of polished bone and a thread of soft gold. The work forced her breathing to slow. Stitch, pull, smooth the petal, check the stem, turn the crown, begin again. The old rhythm returned to her hands. For years, that rhythm had been enough. Plants did not care about bloodline. Roots did not ask whether an omega deserved water. Leaves did not bow to rank before deciding where to grow. The herbarium had given Nerissa a small kingdom made of clay pots, green patience, and problems that could be solved with good tools. Now the larger kingdom pressed against the glass. It waited in the hallways. It whispered from the council chamber. It rustled in the skirts of noble women who had noticed that the future queen's crown had spent more time in Nerissa's hands than anyone else's. The thought should have thrilled her. It did not. Nerissa had never dreamed of being lifted above other people. She had dreamed of being left alone long enough to become useful. She had dreamed of warm gloves in winter, clean shelves, a key to the seed cabinet, and one whole morning without someone calling her little Omega. Wanting Aurelian complicated that dream. He was not a warm glove or a seed cabinet. He was a king with enemies, duties, and a wolf soul who believed table manners were a negotiable concept. He came with counselors, temple laws, public meals, and a palace that treated affection like a sport for witnesses. Yet he also came with listening. That was the unfair part. If he had been only powerful, Nerissa could have kept her distance. If he had been only handsome, she could have blamed eyesight and moved on. If he had been only kind for one day, she could have called it guilt. But he listened. He remembered the broken window latch. He noticed when a brass lamp warmed her wrist. He stopped Var from turning excitement into pressure. He let her finish sentences in rooms where servants were usually interrupted by furniture. The crown looked different when she finished the repair. Not perfect. Better. The left side still leaned by a whisper. Nerissa decided to leave it. Perfect crowns encouraged foolish expectations. Slightly crooked crowns knew more about survival. Across the room, Aurelian studied her work without speaking. He had learned when silence was useful. That, too, was dangerous. Nerissa carried the crown to a cooling rack near the east windows. The rain blurred the glass, turning the palace lights into soft gold smears. The smell of wet stone drifted in each time the door opened. Somewhere in the corridor, a maid laughed, then hushed herself when a guard passed. Nerissa wondered how many small joys vanished that way. Hushed, folded, put away until no one important could hear them. She looked at the repaired crown, then at her marked wrist. The mark had begun this mess by making one foolish sentence loud. Perhaps that was why the whole palace felt stranger now. Old things sounded louder. Cruel jokes, broken rules, quiet hopes, a king's restraint, an Omega's refusal. Moonlight, when it came, touched the glass roof in pale lines. The lilies opened one by one. No sacred music played. No prophecy thundered. No goddess explained herself in a helpful voice. The room offered only damp leaves, warm pipes, and the soft scrape of Var shifting outside the door. It was enough. Nerissa did not decide that she loved Aurelian in one grand moment. That would have been too convenient, and the moon had already abused convenience. Instead, she admitted smaller truths. She wanted him to enter the herbarium tomorrow. She wanted to see whether his severe mouth would fail when Var did something ridiculous. She wanted him to keep asking practical questions. She wanted to know what he looked like without a crown, without witnesses, without the careful loneliness that sat on his shoulders like armor. Most dangerous of all, she wanted to be brave enough to answer when he finally asked. The mark pulsed once. Nerissa covered it with her other hand and breathed through the ache. Not yet, Mother Isolde had said. So Nerissa waited. Waiting was not weakness. Seeds did it all winter. Evening came with rain and gossip. The palace became unbearable. Every servant watched Nerissa with wide eyes. Every noble pretended not to watch. Every moondew lily in the herbarium turned toward her like gossip with petals. Var behaved worse. He began carrying gifts, not jewels. Aurelian forbade that. Not flowers. Nerissa banned that after the crown disaster. Var brought useful things. A clean pair of gloves, a spool of safe gold thread, a blue enamel watering can, one excellent sandwich. The sandwich had a bite missing. Nerissa accepted the gloves, thread, and can. She returned the sandwich. Var looked wounded. Aurelian looked resigned. He says the bite proves quality. He can keep the proof. A fair ruling. They were in the herbarium again, near dusk on the 6th day. Rain moved over the glass roof. The air smelled of wet leaves and warm stone. Nerissa's wrist glowed steadily now, neither fading nor flaring. The mark was waiting. So was she. Aurelian stood beside her while she trimmed damaged moonthyme. He had no reason to be there except the mark, the investigation, and the fact that neither of them wanted him to leave. He did not pretend otherwise. That made the silence gentle. Nerissa placed a clipped stem in the basket. What happens if it fades? Then it fades. That is not an answer. Aurelian kept his gaze on the trimmed stems. It is the safest one. Nerissa set down her scissors. Safe answers are often useless. He accepted that with a small nod. If it fades, I will ask whether I may court you without it. Her scissors paused. Var, hiding behind a planter, vibrated. Nerissa did not look at him, and if I say no, then Var and I will learn dignity. The planter shook. He doubts you. He knows me well. She should have laughed. Instead, her eyes stung. Aurelian saw and looked away at once, giving her privacy inside the same room. That quiet courtesy settled the last of her doubts more firmly than any passionate speech could have done. Nerissa had never needed a king to be perfect. She needed him not to make her smaller. Aurelian had not. That night, she slept badly. The mark hummed beneath her skin. Dreams came in pieces. Lady Caldress laughing. Var dragging an apron through a corridor. Aurelian eating porridge with the focus of a condemned man. Moondew lilies opening like little traitors. Before dawn, she woke to silence. Var was not at her door. The absence felt wrong. She pulled on her robe and stepped into the corridor. The palace was still blue with early light. Torches burned low. Somewhere, a maid yawned. Rain had stopped, leaving the air clean. The mark was dim. Nerissa's heart lurched. She followed the fading glow through the herbarium and into the old moon court, a round garden open to the sky. At its center stood a dry fountain carved from moonstone. Safe, beautiful, cold under starlight. Aurelian stood there alone. Var lay at his feet, silent and tense. Mother Isolde waited near the arch with Aunt Merwin and two moon law witnesses. No nobles, no council, no Lady Caldress. Only people who understood consent mattered more than spectacle. Aurelian turned when Nerissa entered. The mark on her wrist faded another shade. Mother Isolde spoke softly. The seventh dawn begins. Nerissa looked at Aurelian. You arranged witnesses? For your protection. Not yours? Aurelian glanced toward the arch. My protection is mostly Var's delusion. Var thumped his tail once. Nerissa almost smiled. Aurelian stepped closer, then stopped with several feet between them. If the mark fades, nothing will be taken from you, he said. Your place in the herbarium remains. Lady Caldress has been removed from flower supervision. Hessa reports to you for moondew work. Nerissa blinked. Hessa will hate that. Likely. Nerissa studied him. That is very generous. Aurelian's mouth almost moved. It is very practical. She nearly let Var eat a sacred crown. Var looked away. Aunt Merwin coughed into her sleeve. Aurelian's gaze stayed steady. I wanted you to know before I asked. No answer you give changes your safety. The mark dimmed again. It was almost gone. Nerissa felt grief rise, sharp and ridiculous. She had cursed the mark for 6 days. Now watching it fade felt like losing the evidence that the impossible had happened. Aurelian saw that too. His control thinned. Nerissa Vale, he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth. Not like a file, not like a problem, like a choice. May I court you without the mark deciding for either of us? Var stopped breathing. Nerissa looked at the wolf soul. If I say yes, he cannot bring me bitten sandwiches. Aurelian nodded. A strict but necessary term. And no eating ceremonial flowers. That will be difficult. Nerissa looked at the wolf soul. For Var? Aurelian's answer came with royal sorrow. For the palace budget. She laughed. The mark brightened. Not fully. Just enough to glow like dawn under her skin. Nerissa stepped closer. Yes. Var made a sound that began as a howl and ended as a sob. Mother Isolde wiped one eye. Aunt Merwin whispered that breakfast would be spectacular. Aurelian did not move until Nerissa held out her marked hand. He took it gently. His palm was warm. No claiming pressure. No alpha command. No silver. Only skin, breath, and the fragile courage of two people who had somehow reached honesty through a joke about marriage. The mark steadied. Then it changed. The binding loop opened. The crescent remained, but the stars moved apart, forming a choice mark instead of a claim. Mother Isolde inhaled sharply. It accepted courtship, she said. Nerissa frowned at the mark. It can do that? Apparently. Did no one write that down? The priestess looked offended. The mice may have eaten it. Var barked. Aurelian looked down at him. Do not accuse temple mice without proof, Var grumbled. Nerissa laughed again, and the mark glowed warmer. The public part came that evening. Aurelian could have kept the courtship private. Nerissa almost asked for that. Then she imagined Lady Caldress, the dormitory whispers, and every Omega who had watched her vanish into royal scandal without explanation. If the insult had been public, the truth could not hide in a cupboard. The midsummer banquet filled the great hall with gold light, music, and suspicious floral arrangements. No silver touched the tables. The candlesticks were polished brass. The knives were wolf iron. The plates were white ceramic edged in safe gold. Nerissa entered from the side door with Hessa and the herbarium staff. She wore a simple, deep green gown borrowed from Aunt Merwin's stores and altered by 3 maids who pretended not to cry. Her hair was braided with moondew leaves and gold thread. The choice mark glowed faintly at her wrist. She did not wear the moonwake crown. It rested on the banquet table where it belonged. Aurelian stood from the high table. Every voice quieted. Var, beside the throne, wore a small garland of star time around his neck. No one had approved that. Everyone knew who had done it. Var looked magnificent and unrepentant. Aurelian descended the dais and crossed the hall to Nerissa. He did not summon her upward. He came down. That mattered. It mattered to every Omega watching from the service line. It mattered to Nerissa more than she expected. He stopped before her and offered his hand. The mark warmed. Nerissa placed her hand in his. Aurelian faced the hall. 6 days ago, a joke was spoken in pain. The moon answered too loudly. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the court. Var gave a proud bark. Since then, the king continued, Nerissa Vale has shown more courage, honesty, and patience than many who were born standing nearer this table. Several nobles lowered their eyes. Lady Caldress was absent. No one missed her. Aurelian looked at Nerissa, and the sternness of the king softened into something that belonged only to the man. The mark did not make my choice. I make it now, publicly, with her permission. He turned fully toward her. Nerissa, may I court you before this palace, not as a joke, not as a claim, and not as a command? The hall held its breath. Nerissa looked at Var. The wolf soul had both paws pressed over his nose, as if trying not to interfere with history. His tail was betraying him. She looked back at Aurelian. Yes, she said, but your wolf owes the herbarium 6 moontime pots, 1 watering can, and a formal apology to the future queen's flower crown. The hall broke. Laughter rolled from the service doors to the high table. Even the counselors laughed. Mother Yisold leaned on Aunt Merwin. Var leapt up, spun in a circle, and knocked over exactly 1 empty stool. Aurelian's smile appeared in full view of the court. That caused a second wave of shock. Nerissa decided she liked that one best. The king lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. The choice mark brightened, then settled into a soft crescent on her wrist. Not a chain. Not a command. A promise waiting to be kept. Weeks later, the palace still told the story badly. Some said the king fell in love because of a moon mark. Others said his wolf soul knew first. One kitchen boy claimed the porridge had been blessed. Hessa insisted the flowers had always favored Nerissa. Mother Isolde wrote a new temple record called The Future Husband Incident and locked it away from mice. Nerissa knew the truth was messier and better. She had spoken from wounded pride. The moon had misunderstood. Then, over 7 impossible days, an Alpha King had listened, waited, defended, apologized, eaten terrible porridge, and asked. That was why she stayed. Not because of the glowing mark. Not because of Var, though he continued to campaign shamelessly. Because Aurelian made room for her to choose. On the first official day of courtship, Nerissa returned to the herbarium at dawn. She found 6 new moontime pots lined beside her work table. Beside them sat a blue enamel watering can, a gold thread spool, and 1 sealed note. The note was written in Aurelian's precise hand. Var apologizes for the crown. Below that, in a much larger paw-smudged mark, someone had dragged ink across the paper. Nerissa laughed so loudly that 3 lilies opened. Aurelian entered a moment later, dressed in black, hair tied back, crown absent. He looked at the open flowers. Should I worry? Always. Var trotted in behind him with a new flower crown in his mouth. Nerissa pointed at the floor. Drop it. The wolf soul dropped it at once. Aurelian looked impressed. He listens to you, only when he wants credit. That still exceeds council standards. She smiled and picked up the crown. It was made from moondew lilies, gold thread, and 1 badly placed velvet leaf. Var had clearly helped. Aurelian watched her with quiet hope. Nerissa placed the crown on the work table. Not today, she said. The king nodded, accepting the boundary without disappointment. That acceptance made her step closer. But someday, she added, if you keep improving. Var collapsed dramatically into a bed of star time. Aurelian's eyes closed. Nerissa reached out and brushed a bit of gold thread from his sleeve. The choice mark warmed beneath her skin. Your wolf is ruining my herbarium again. Our herbarium, Aurelian said, then stopped. The word our hung in the air, careful, soft, asking. Nerissa looked around the room she loved. The glass roof held dawn light. The lilies glowed faintly. The air smelled of mint, rain, and new beginnings that had no respect for common sense. Then she looked at the Alpha King, who had once terrified the whole court and now stood among flower pots, waiting for a low Omega's answer. Our herbarium, she agreed. The mark glowed. Var howled into the star time. Somewhere in the palace, Mother Wysold likely lost another breakfast. Nerissa laughed, and Aurelian laughed with her. For once, the moon stayed quiet. It had finally learned that some promises were better when people chose them themselves. Thank you for listening. If this story made you laugh, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next story. We'll see you in the next one.